So today on the podcast, we have one of our book review episodes, this time with a book that will be published next month. But since the focus of this book is Mickey Mouse and Christmas in the 1930s, I wanted to talk about it today. Since it's Christmas week and since for our podcast, this seems like a perfect topic right now. When the book shows up on Amazon in a few weeks, I'll remind everyone that it's there. The book is beautifully illustrated with images from many decades ago. How Mickey and other characters appeared in marionette shows, in window displays, in parades, and elsewhere, long before there was even the slightest glimmer of an idea that would develop into Disneyland. As always, I'll read you some sections from the book, and then we'll talk with the author, Didier, Ghez, who's been on our show before. He's the author of many books focused on the history of the Disney studio, including the series They Drew As They Pleased from Chronicle Books. And so today, as we're now well into the holiday season, Mickey Mouse in the 1930s, the Christmas season with Didier Ghez. The book for today is divided into two halves. The first half explores how Mickey appeared in marionette shows and parades in the 1930s, mostly during the holiday season. And the second half is focused on Christmas celebrations, including store displays and entire play areas inside of department stores. I'll begin today with 3 short sections from the first half of the book to give you some reference points before we start talking with Didier. And then halfway through our episode today, I'll read you another section from the second half of the book. Here's how the book begins. 11 days before Thanksgiving, on November 18, 1928, Steamboat Willie premiered at the Colony Theater in New York. It was Mickey Mouse's first public appearance. Mickey soon took the world by storm. Nearly 7 years later, on the other side of the world, an Indian newspaper, the Bombay Chronicle, reported, Saturday, September 28th will mark 7 years since that day in the dim past when Mickey Mouse was first given to the world. On his 7th birthday, Mickey Mouse can look back to more than most of us can look forward to. In his short lifetime, he has traveled more widely than a whole covey of Marco Polos. He has met with more people than all the diplomats in the world combined. He has created more laughter than any brace of comics. He has made more people think than many an ancient philosopher. Mickey Mouse, that giant of 7 summers, is already the subject of a lengthy article in those annals of the Encyclopedia Britannica. When he puts out the candles on his birthday cake, it will be a blow heard around the world. Mickey's official birth date had not yet been set in stone as November 18th, but in the span of just 7 years, Walt Disney's creation had become a worldwide phenomenon. Much has been written about his career on the silver screen and about his adventures in the comics. While the cinema and comic strips were 2 of the most successful avatars of popular culture in the 1930s, Walt and some around him realized early that Mickey Mouse had the potential to become a star in all forms of popular culture, from vaudeville to theater shows, from Thanksgiving Day floats to carnival parades, from marionette plays to radio programs. He could be a star everywhere. What was more, this would allow his audience to meet him in real life. And if all of this were not enough, a salesman of genius helped take things to yet another level. Beginning in 1932, thanks to Kay Kamen, Mickey Mouse became Santa Claus's greatest ally, taking over department store display windows and toylands around the United States and the world, and becoming the lead attraction in Thanksgiving parades. At Christmas until 1937, when Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs took the relay, Mickey Mouse and his friends were everywhere. To ensure Mickey's omnipresence during the holiday season, Kamen relied on Disney artists and on display window designers, store managers, and float creators. He also got some invaluable help from a handful of talented puppeteers. And now I'll read the description of one Disney-centered puppet show in the 1930s. There were many of these moving across the country, but here is a description of the show put on by Sue Hastings and her company. For the Christmas season that year, Sue Hastings developed two new Disney shows, one based on the Three Little Pigs and the other titled Mickey Mouse at the North Pole, which debuted on November 19, 1933 at the R.H. White Company department store in Boston. The Daily Boston Globe of that day carried the following ad touting the shows. R.H. White Company, beginning Monday, Three Little Pigs and a Marionette Show. Sue Hastings has developed Walt Disney's captivating silly symphony in color to marionettes, with Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf and everything. Also, Mickey at the North Pole in the auditorium, third floor, every day for the next 2 weeks, 11 a.m. and 2 and 3:30 p.m. On Saturday, November 25th, Hastings took the play to Philadelphia, according to an ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which read, Strawbridge and Clothier visit Mickey's Mirror Maze, 5th floor. On Saturday in the toy store, come see the Mickey Mouse house. Seems a mile long, no wider than its front door, with surprises at every corner. Mickey rediscovers the North Pole with his Arctic expedition. At the end, the real Mickey Mouse, an authorized appearance of Walt Disney's famous creation, the Philadelphia hit from the cartoon scene from As Thousands Cheer in Person. He walks, he talks, he greets the kiddies every minute of the day. Mickey Mouse marionettes. Sue Hastings, the Belasco of marionette producers, presents her famous Mickey Mouse scenes at 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, and 4 o'clock for the smaller children in the juvenile section, 4th floor. In parallel from December 22, 1933 to January 1, 1934, another of Sue Hastings' companies presented a Mickey Mouse marionette show at the Dominion Theatre in Winnipeg, Canada. It was known both as the Mouse Capers and Mice Capers. Mickey Mouse at the North Pole made an encore in Chicago during the Christmas season when it was featured in Toyland on the 6th floor of Mandel's department store. And lastly, I'll read you a short section focused on how all of those puppet shows also influenced the culture back at the Disney studio in California. In October 1935, Ken Anderson, who had recently become a junior animator at Disney, submitted an idea to the story department. Mickey and Minnie conduct a puppet show? Goofy and Donald also work backstage and get into a fight, which the puppets imitate. Walt did not react enthusiastically, but wrote head of story department Ted Sears, the marionette idea might work in somewhere with Mickey and Minnie entertaining little orphans. It does not sound like a lot of good gag possibilities as it now stands, but maybe it can be tied in with something. 3 months later, Ken insisted that his puppet concept might be a good one for a short. Still unconvinced, Walt tried to steer the idea in a different direction. He wrote Ken on January 15, 1936, after reading your note regarding puppets, what I told you regarding the making of a puppet short still stands. Though the thought struck me that maybe, as a hobby, some of the fellows here would like to work with you on the making of some little puppet act that we might put on some night when we're having a shindig or something of the kind. We might work up some little skit burlesquing some incident that happened around the studio. Possibly Joe Grant would like to work with you making caricatures of the fellows in the studio, or something on that order. Then we might also use this as a study some nights in the action analysis classes to see what can be done with action accents. I thought of having some puppeteers come out to show us what they can do to give actions accents and create illusions for whatever good we might get out of it. toward creating better illusions in our animation. On June 15, 1936, painter Catherine Kerwin suggested a story built on the life of marionettes. When the master is away, the puppets come to life. There is romance with the villain. The hero and the villain fight for the girl, wreck the room, and when the master returns, the marionettes are back in their rightful places, but have broken arms and legs. The villain is too badly damaged to repair, and the puzzled old man tosses him into the ash can. The following month, commencing on yet another puppet story idea, a proposed adaptation of Pinocchio, Ted Sears explained, "Ken Anderson tried to do a story like that. He and I went through it and wrote up a short outline showing possibilities, and Walt at first glance turned it down. That is, he put it aside at the time. It was a Minnie and Mickey picture, with both working on a puppet show that involved the duck and Pluto and the goof, and the audience could have been made up of the kids and the orphans. The puppets could have been caricatures of celebrities. We had quite a few amusing things. Minnie suspended on a platform playing the piano and working puppets at the same time. At one point, the cartoon characters would be in a heap and the puppet characters would be doing their stuff. Burt Gillette for a few years wanted to do a puppet picture, and the only plot we ever talked of was of a common situation of the puppet show after the theater is dark. Everybody is left. Some mischievous puppet gets out of the box, walks around, and wakes the others up. We were going to work up a fantasy. They get musical instruments out and put up their own show unseen by any human audience." 1 year later, on October 1937, story artist Joe Sabo suggested Donald is captured by Pete one dark night and made to work with his marionettes. Donald doesn't discover until the end of the show that the other players are dummies except one other, Gus Goose. They escape by tying up Maestro Pete in his own strings. During the show, Donald is repeatedly socked by the other performers, making him very angry. None of these ideas, however, made it to the screen. And now, let's bring in Didier Ghez. So your book is divided into two main sections. The first is Holiday Marionettes and Parades. Coincidentally, longtime listeners here on this podcast know a little about Tony Sarg, his marionette shows, and how these elements contributed specifically to the Mickey Balloon Float for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. But your section goes far, far beyond Sarg and the initial presentation of the Disney Inflatable Float on the East Coast and so on. And then in the second half of your book, you focus on Christmas celebrations, in part in terms of Disney merchandising and store displays in the 1930s. So I wanted to take these two halves one at a time. And I wanted to start with some questions about how Disney partnered with marionette companies to create early shows featuring Mickey and other characters along with the related parades, and then to move on to Christmas celebrations as they were organized in the 1930s. So maybe we can start with this. Can you talk about the wide use of Disney marionettes in the 1930s? And also, why marionettes? Live-action productions of Mickey Mouse today typically include performers dressed in costume. What was it about the 1930s, particularly at Christmas time, that brought Mickey Mouse and the other Disney characters to many cities through the work of marionettes?
So what you have to remember to understand the context is the fact that in the 1930s, at the beginning of the 20th century, basically, department stores were a very, very big thing in many, many cities all around the US, and frankly, even in some cities in Europe, like France, like Paris and London and so on. And those department stores at Christmas wanted to attract both families and their kids. And it wasn't just attracting them to the toy store. They had lots of other attractions within those department stores. And so the toy store itself, and we'll talk about that in more detail later, but the toy store itself was a big attraction. And it wasn't just that they were nice toys in there, but they made it really, really, really special. It started looking almost like a theme park in some cases, and so that is pretty amazing in itself. But they also usually those department stores included a theater that could be used for a lot of other things during the year. But at Christmas, obviously, the theater had something that was aimed at kids. And apparently, one of the things that they like to have in the theater were marionette shows. That was very big, which frankly did not, as a Frenchman, did not surprise me very much because in France we have a big tradition of marionettes with Guignol. In the UK they have a big tradition of marionettes, of course, with Punch and Judy, and so all of that was very familiar from a European perspective, and that's still. There's still marionette shows in France in some big gardens and things like that during the spring and the summer. And so, yes, and so they would have those marionette displays, and they would also sell, in some cases, the marionettes themselves.
Okay. So one of the things I was wondering as I was reading your book was, what is it about Mickey Mouse that makes people, particularly kids, want to see him in dimensional form and not just as an animated character up on the screen? I'm not aware, though I could be wrong here, of similar in-person events so pervasive for Disney's earlier series, such as the Alice comedies or Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The public's desires to see cartoon characters in person, at least in large form, seems to start either with Mickey or in the 1930s. So something here is changing. Do you have any idea what that is?
Well, there are two factors that come into play, and before I get into that, just a little bit of background. When I started researching that project, I did not start by researching the Christmas season angle, the holiday season angle. I really started because, well, it was 2020 and the pandemic has just started, and it dawned on me, oh, I have a really, really, really big problem. I'm extremely addicted to Disney research, and the Disney archives are clearly going to be closed for a really long time. And I realized very early in the pandemic that it was really big and that was going to affect us for a really long time. Unlike some people who thought it would just take a few weeks. I was looking at the Spanish flu epidemic from 1917, 1918, and it had taken at least a year to calm down. And I realized, okay, well, this is probably going to be the same thing or worse. So all of that to say that I realized that the archives would be closed for a really long time, and that told me, Didier, you need to find a subject matter related to Disney history to research where you don't have, at least at first, to rely too much on the Disney archives, or you don't have to rely on the Disney archives to start with. And so I realized, okay, well, what do I have access to? There are a few big collections that I have access to of material that are digitized, but mostly what I have access to that people have not necessarily researched in a lot of details are online tools like archives.org and newspaper.com and things like that. And I'm like, okay, what have I always been curious about, that where I could find a lot of information about that subject matter online. And the subject matter that really interested me very much was both the shows, the live shows of Mickey Mouse, and the radio shows of Mickey Mouse from the 1930s. And so I started researching that. And when I started researching that, what became very apparent just a few weeks into the research is how incredibly famous, how big a star Mickey Mouse was in the 1930s. Much, much, much bigger than what I'd ever realized. I knew he was big at the time, but I had no idea that both in the US, in Canada, and all around the world, he was that big and absolutely everywhere, almost all the time. And so he was really like the absolute superstar, more than any other cinema idol from the time period. It was just absolutely insane what I discovered at that point. And so that's one factor that contributes to that. The second factor that contributes to that obviously is the fact that he has a certain shape, he has a certain presence on screen, what John Hench would call sort of the reassuring aspect of Mickey Mouse, the roundness that is particularly appealing. And then there is a third aspect to all of this, which obviously I get into a lot in the book, which is that there was a special person, Kay Kamen, who was a merchandising genius and who just amplifies the phenomenon 10 times, 20 times, 100 times because of just the way he partners with the department stores, the way he partners with the licensees, the way he partners with everyone else to just make this like the biggest phenomenon of all time, not just on screen, but everywhere in real life, in department stores, in live shows, on radio, like absolutely everywhere, and obviously in physical merchandise.
So I've got some questions for Kay Kamen, but I'm going to wait a bit on those till we get to the store displays and things. So one of the things that I was just so impressed in the book are the amazing photos that you have for the Disney shows, the store displays, and everything. I mean, there's things in here that I've never seen before. And also, one of the things that I was curious about in terms of the marionette shows, they're not just in the department stores. There's mentions of them being in part of vaudeville presentations at the Wilshire Theater in Los Angeles. And they're also in movie palaces owned by Fox. And so it was just a practical question that I have. Do they have larger marionettes for bigger venues, or how are people seeing the marionettes when they go to big theaters?
You know what? That's actually an excellent question that I hadn't asked myself. I don't know what the answer to that is, to be honest. I do not know. That's a very good question, especially when you think about those movie palaces. I'm not
Hmm.
sure what the answer is. I'm gonna have to look into that.
The Fox Wilshire is a big theater, and if it's packed, unless they had bigger I don't know. But I was kind of curious about that. So there's also a reciprocal aspect to these shows. Disney, as you discussed in your book, explored the idea of bringing more marionette gags into the Mickey Mouse shorts, including at least one cartoon idea where there'd be a marionette show as part of the animation. Why do you think none of this moved forward? As it would have been a way for the cartoons to promote the puppet shows and then also for the puppet shows to promote the cartoons.
It would, but when you look at first the number of IDs that are submitted to Walt at the time for shorts, for 10 or 15 IDs, you have one that actually makes it to the screen. Um, and and I think that Walt was just interested in the strength of the idea in itself, not necessarily the promotional value. He's sometimes interested in the promotional value, but I think he looks at those shorts, especially considering the budget it takes to produce them and so on. First and foremost, he looks at the intrinsic quality of the story, and in this case, he's not fully convinced. He's not convinced that that's really going to work for whatever reason at the time.
So, one of my favorite parts about the first half of your book is where Walt hits back with a note about maybe what they can do with these marionettes. And maybe what they could do with these marionettes is not put them into Mickey Mouse or Silly Symphony shorts, but instead make marionettes that are caricatures of the better known artists at the studio to create these, I think it's described as burlesque gags, so vaudeville gags of studio life to be performed for people who worked at the studio. So like a couple questions here. How did this like define the studio culture back in the 30s, and why didn't this idea move forward? Because I think this would have been fascinating.
Well, actually, that's interesting. So the first part, what does that describe of the culture of the studio? I mean, Walt is always looking for new ideas, and he's artist always, and he's just every type of ID that he can find where he can plus it and make it bigger and look at new ways of using it and so on. It's clearly, I mean, the sky is the limit in the 1930s. There is absolutely no doubt, and that's what makes that time period like so absolutely fascinating. But the reality is, I think that a little part of that idea actually happened. you can see some photos, and if you look at the chapter of on Joe Grant on in They Drew as They Pleased, you'll see that there is a photo of Joe Grant with a marionette of W.C. Fields, um, and I would not be surprised if that's a result of that idea by Walt. It could be.
Huh. Interesting stuff. That is fascinating. So, so the original second feature was going to be Bambi. That has pre-production problems. They're having trouble drawing deers anatomically correct and putting enough realism into it. And so Pinocchio is bumped up as the second feature. Do you think the marionette culture of the early to mid 1930s, as it's related to the studio, do you think that influences Walt's decision to move in this direction with Pinocchio?
That's funny. I don't know what the answer is to that. So we would have to ask JB. I mean, it could be that. It could be JB Kaufman, who obviously wrote the book about Pinocchio. It could be also Walt's trip to Italy in 1935. It could be there are various factors I think that can come into play in there. Um, and frankly, I mean, the studio collects lots and lots of versions of Pinocchio way before even they start working on the movie. So I don't know. I think it's, as always, in those cases when you look for the sources of inspiration, it's a combination of factors. So yeah, it could have come into
Could
play.
be okay. So, and your chapter on this transitions from the marionette shows to something that's kind of related to the marionette shows. And so the big puppeteer would have been Tony Sarg in the early part of the 20th century. And he thought of the Macy's Day balloon floats as upside down marionettes, in which the strings connect to something above the, group puppeteers as to something below them. So, what moved Disney to create these massive floating marionettes? And how did their presentation around the winter holidays further cement the Disney characters to the idea of Christmas?
Well, so first, just going back to the marionettes themselves for a second. So it's interesting because Tony Sarg never actually created marionettes for Disney, like small marionettes for Disney, but he basically trains or inspire every one of the other marionette makers and puppeteers that do create Disney related, Mickey Mouse related shows. So the Hestwoods, Jean Gros, Sue Hastings, Catherine Westfield, they're all influenced in one or another by Tony Sarg. So it's really funny that even in the first part of the book, in that chapter on marionettes, like Tony Sarg is at the center of everything without himself producing any Disney marionettes.
Well, I assume that Tony Sarg in the 20s and 30s is like a brand name. Like he can sell himself. He doesn't need to license or partner with an outside company that would reduce his profit. Whereas the people he trains, I think, having name brand recognition is probably much more valuable to them.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. And then what basically happens after when it comes to the parades, the floats, and so on and so forth, is that very very early, Disney starts partnering with basically department stores that are organizing those big parades to promote. And obviously, what we know right now very much is Macy's because that's the parade that still happens today. But what I realized by researching this book, which I didn't know, I mean, it's so much part of American culture, but I don't know if even people today in the US know that very much, is that in the 1920s, in the 1930s, a lot of the major department stores organized their own Thanksgiving parade. And so it wasn't just Macy's, it was Gimbel's, it was a store in Dayton, Ohio, Rilke's. It's just a lot of those major, and even in Canada and so on and so forth, a lot of those major department stores organize those big parades. And when they organize those big parades, they often have Disney Mickey Mouse related floats in them. And what was great for me is obviously I had seen the balloons from the Macy's parade from 1934, 1935, but what I hadn't seen were all of those other floats from all of those other parades from all around the world. And I hadn't seen them in a lot of cases because they had never been released anywhere before, because even they had never been digitized. I mean, I found quite a few of those photos that were only in negative form in like hidden archives in some very remote places. And I got those archives to digitize them for the book. And fortunately, we had the resources of the Hyperion Historical Alliance to help with all of that, because it frankly wasn't cheap. And so we got all of that digitized. We got the rights to release them. And I would say that like 90% of them or more are being seen there in the book for the very first time. And then Macy's, with Tony Stark, decides very early that they want their parade to be very, very, very special. And that's when they start launching those parades with the big balloons, the big inflatable balloons. And of course, Mickey Mouse being so famous in the mid 1930s, I mean, he has to be one of the balloons. And so they approached the studio, and they actually approached the studio with an idea of doing a short subject that would be related to those balloons. And Walt is like, no, he sees that that's like, it would make the short difficult to sell outside of the Christmas season. It would have lots of issues. It would be too expensive to produce for the limited return and so on. So he's like, he turns down that idea, but he's like, yeah, actually, I'll go with a Mickey Mouse balloon and Three Little Pigs balloons, and or Horace Horsecollar and the Big Bad Wolf, and so on and so forth. That works. And that letter where basically the managers of Macy's contact Walt to discuss that possibility. That's a letter that I discovered um, and I was so grateful when I discovered it when we preserved the Paul F. Anderson collection, and I stumbled upon that letter within the collection. I was like, oh, this is one of the missing links. This is just absolutely amazing.
That's amazing. But yeah. So I later have some questions about the store displays and Disneyland, but there's one interesting connection with the puppeteers in Disneyland that I was wondering if you had any light or comment or opinions on. So what I think is like the first early attempt to make something that's identifiable as Disneyland is in 1939. And Walt assigns two puppeteers to do the research on this. So over in the character model shop, Bob Jones and his brother Bill have a little bit of downtime, and these are puppeteers that have come in to make essentially what we'd call now maquettes. And he assigns them to create 2 or 3 acres of land at the studios. The new studio in Burbank's not done yet, but it will be soon. To develop an area there that's going to have like a German forest with Snow White's cottage and maybe the diamond mines for the dwarves, and then a European village for Pinocchio, and also an area that showcases how the art of animation and how hand-drawn animation is produced. So is it just coincidence that Walt's using puppeteers to create this, or does this have some connecting tissue to what's happening earlier in the 30s as well in terms of the dimensionality of the Disney characters?
Excellent question. I don't necessarily have the answer, but I love the connection between the two. I love the connection between the two. There is, of course, another connection, which is the connection with Bob Baker. And so obviously Bob Baker, and I don't know when he starts doing that. I don't know if it's in the 60s or in the or even earlier than that, but he's the one who supervises the creation of a lot of those incredibly elaborate store displays, store windows at Disneyland on Main Street. What's really what was really amazing to me is that I had interviewed Bob at some point in the past, and he had mentioned the connection, the fact that he had seen a show in the 1930s, a Disney-related show as puppets in the 1930s, and I found actually photographs of that show, which was a show, if I'm not mistaken, by the Hestwood brothers, and he actually worked for them as a kid, helped them behind the scenes on that show, the Three Little Pigs show. And you have a photo of that show in the book, and I just love that. That was just that. There's a whole like visual essay to do about the obviously the store windows, that store displays that he created for Disneyland for Main Street, and there is an archive where I think a lot of those photos are preserved, and that would be really fun to do at some point.
Before we jump into the second half of the book, which is in part about how Mickey Mouse became a holiday fixture in department stores across the country, I want to read one more passage to expand out our reference points from the book to contribute to this conversation. Here's that passage. Christmas 1933. The 100 members of the Santa Claus Association of New York were unhappy. In the midst of the Depression, in toy stores around the city, they were now competing with Mickey Mouse and the Three Little Pigs. This must stop, one of them told the reporter. It isn't right for us to compete with pigs and mice. It was not the first year that Mickey and his friends were used by retailers to attract customers. It was, however, the first year that Disney's merchandising genius, Kay Kamen, had orchestrated all of those efforts, and the results were unprecedented, upsetting to some, awe-inspiring to others. Some retailers became aware of Mickey's appeal in 1930, when the mouse was barely 2 years old. In Los Angeles, for example, Bullock's department store created an elaborate Christmas display window filled with Mickey Mouse dolls designed by local seamstress Charlotte Clark. That same year, a visionary businessman took things further overseas. In December 1930, the Australian Brisbane Courier reported, "Children who have followed the fortunes of Mickey the Mouse on screen and who want to meet their hero in real life should visit McDonnell and East Limited on George Street in Brisbane. Mickey has taken up his abode in the Mouseland Burrow in the toy department on the top floor, where he is at home to all his young admirers. Outside his house are working models of himself and his little friend Minnie, and behind the black curtain that forms his front door are all manner of thrills and delights. The passages are lined with scenes showing Mickey's adventures on the railway and on the cricket oval, and there is a large figure of him laughing at the antics of the children as they slide and stumble over the burrow floor, which seems to spin and swing and heave and fall at the 1 minute. Laugh and grow fat, says the adage, and this is the rule in Mickey's home. For a mirror near the entrance shows children with long, emaciated bodies, but after they have stumbled their way through Mouseland with giggles at every step, they are confronted with a mirror that gives a reflection of figures that are broader than they are long. Finally, the children pass through the sausage balloon lane and cheese maze and down the slippery slide to where the real-life Mickey, performer Mr. J.M. Montgomery, is waiting to hand them each a gift. This attraction will continue daily, and the children will find they get more than their 6 pence worth of fun and enjoyment. In New Zealand that same year, the department store George Courts from Auckland encouraged families to visit the house of Mickey the Mouse, as he was often referred to in Australia and New Zealand. The New Zealand Herald explained, Wonderland, the home of Mickey Mouse, is the place to find Father Christmas in George Court's vast store. The home of Mickey Mouse, where happiness is showered on everyone, is a remarkable place, a real wonderland. A train which never stops travels through the countries of the world, in and out of tunnels, over bridges and through dense forests. Then there is a speed race between two of Mickey's friends, but best of all is the wedding of Mickey the Mouse and Minnie. After the young couple reach the house, there's a ball at which the guests dance to the strains of mouse music. They never stop dancing because mouse music is so enchanting that they never get tired, and it is most amusing to watch them at their capers. Later on, Mickey has a round of miniature golf and gets himself into all kinds of trouble in the bunkers.
So let's shift over to the second half of your book for a little bit on Christmas celebrations, which is in part about how Disney used merchandising to increase its overall footprint and also further cements the Disney character's identity with Christmas. And I know you mentioned Kay came in earlier, but maybe you can give our listeners a little more information on who he was, because he's so important to the development of the Disney studio. But yet, I don't think that some listeners will know who he is, but I don't think that most Disney fans know who he is because he doesn't work on the films. He works over on the business areas of the studio, but his contributions really helped Disney become a success early on.
Yeah, I mean, KKman is an absolute marketing genius, and he starts working for Disney in mid 1932, and he used to basically promote other brands, much smaller brands, via a magazine that would be distributed in stores and via special promotion with stores, where he would push that character and that brand. And obviously, he realizes early in the 1930s that Mickey Mouse is very, very, very big. And we don't know exactly the way he connects to Walt, but he was based in Kansas City for quite a while. K. Kamen was, and he was partner with a person called Streeter Blair, and they had that company in Kansas City. And at some point around early 1932, mid 1932, Walt and him connect. Either because Walt and Roy realize that Kay is doing some incredible things and they're the ones contacting him, or because, as the legend says, he calls the studio and Walt tells him to come immediately or something like that. We don't know, and he has never been super clear about how that whole connection happened, and we haven't found like the correspondence and the other elements to prove that. But in any case, he starts working for Disney, and he immediately, and when I say for Disney, he starts working with Disney because he's not an employee of the studio. He has his own company, and he immediately reorganizes the way the relationship with licensors happens. He reorganizes really the way the licenses are sold. He makes sure that the quality of the product is increased. He makes sure there is basically exclusivity per category for the companies that work with Disney. He basically invents the whole merchandise and licensing business the way we know it still today. And then he takes it to the next level by doing some exclusive partnerships with the key department stores in each city, which he had already done for the previous brand he was managing. But obviously now he has Mickey Mouse, so he can do it on a much greater scale. And so at Christmas, you see Mickey everywhere, so much so that at some point you have articles that say, well, we don't know if Mickey Mouse is not going to take over from Santa Claus really soon.
Yeah, the rivalry between Santa versus the mouse. Mm-hmm. So in terms of speculation, so before Snow White, Disney is not the most financially stable studio in the world. It has good periods. It has periods where it struggles a little bit. How important is Kay Kamen to keeping Disney solvent during this period and allowing it to move forward with its pictures? Is the amount of money that he brings in? There was a previous company that manages merchandising, but are Kay Kamen's efforts significant enough to keep Disney afloat, or is Disney financially in trouble without Kay Kamen's efforts?
We would have to look at the exact numbers, but he's clearly bringing a significant amount of revenue to the studio in those years, and so it definitely helps a lot. I mean, clearly, as we both know, Disney was never financially stable until probably like the early 1960s. And so yeah, the merchandising aspect absolutely helps, no doubt. And obviously it helps also in more ways than one, because it helps in terms of revenue, but in terms it helps in terms of the promotion it creates for, and how much it builds the brand and how much it reinforces. I mean, it's the whole flywheel system that so many other companies have tried to emulate and have failed to emulate. So yes.
So one of the things that he sets up are these amazing Christmas displays in windows. And let me see, I think the last time I was in New York during the winter holidays was 2019, just before the pandemic. And I don't recall even in New York anything of this scale being done today. Is there?
So I don't know if there is in New York. I haven't seen any of those in New York. Having said that, I was reminded when I saw those displays of what would still happen at big department stores in Paris, like the Printemps, La Samaritaine, and so on and so forth, or in London at Harrods, for example. And that would be very similar. They would have those big, massive animated displays in those store windows where kids would just, I mean, it would be like going to an attraction, like literally with a line in front of the store to just watch the displays. And so yes, so that's what it reminded me of. And I grew up really with those displays in the 70s, 80s, and they still happen until today, again in Paris. So that wasn't so much of a surprise. What was a surprise is in how many parts of the country they were, and how amazingly elaborate they were for the 1930s. I mean, when I was conducting that research on that other on what will be the other book on stage and radio in the 1930s, I stumbled upon those photos of those Christmas displays, and that's when I was like, okay, this is a book in itself. This is absolutely stunningly fascinating. I'd never seen this in my life. Those are incredibly compelling displays. They use, of course, the best Mickey Mouse, the best Minnie Mouse, Horace Horsecollar, and so on, which makes it even better for me because obviously those ancillary characters are just like I just love them, and there was so much of it. And then the way we discovered, I was helped very much by Libby Spatz, who was at the time obviously researching the project with me, and who then focused really on one part of the whole thing, which was her main center of interest, which is the Mickey Mouse Club from the 1930s. But Libby then started with me to dig into trade publications from the toy world from that time period. And again, Toy World and a few others, and that's where, I mean, we started getting into this massive treasure trove. And some of those publications are really, really, really rare. So I had a volunteer in New York who spent days on end at the New York Public Library looking for what I was looking for, and then sending me high resolution scans of everything he could find. And so you'll see absolutely all of the key photos that we found in those magazines from the time period. And then there were some issues of that magazine that were not even available at the New York Public Library, so we had to find them in an archives, like hidden in some place. And we got the physical magazines shipped from that place, which was the only place where those magazines existed, to Libby. And they only did that because she's a trained librarian, and so they trusted her. But that was just absolutely insane. And we were like, oh my God, let's hope that those magazines do not get lost in the mail and so on and so forth, because they're one of a kind at this stage. And so, yeah, that was just absolutely fantastic.
I should probably just jump in and gloss the Mickey Mouse Club for listeners, that the Mickey Mouse Club in the 30s has nothing to do with the TV show. It has to do with kids going to theaters to see Disney shorts and shorts from other animated studios, usually as part of a weekend venue. But in terms of like Christmas, Mickey gets so attached to Christmas that there's literally a type of rivalry in these stores between Mickey and Santa, in which some of the people who play Santa might be a little upset that some of their work is being given over to another character and not to them. How did Mickey get so attached to this particular holiday?
No, no kidding. At some point, they get so upset. I think it's in 1933 or 1934 that they almost go on strike. It's absolutely that was just crazy to find that. Um, I don't know. I mean, basically, obviously, before Mickey Mouse, the character that attracts kids to the toy stores is Santa Claus. But Mickey is so popular that he's an even better bet than Santa Claus at that time. And so yeah, I mean, but usually they are partnered in those promotions. I mean, you get Santa. You even get in one of the promotions, you get Santa and Mickey arriving to a specific city by plane, and I can't remember if it's Santa or Mickey or both that then jump in parachute from the plane to arrive in the city. I mean, it's just crazy.
Does Santa take his plane over to the Hyperion studio and pick up Mickey, or is it the other way around?
That is a very, very good question.
So some of these store displays, to me at least, seem like another forerunner to Disneyland, with dioramas and moving figures, which really aren't that different from how Walt later used mechanical or even later audio animatronic figures in his park. But you also mentioned something that I've never heard of before, an experience that was framed as a ride called the Mickey Mouse Magic Carpet Ride, which seems to have had moving benches and also a movie component that could be set up in some of these department stores. I think this might be the first Disney amusement style ride that I know of in the early 1930s. Can you tell us how this worked?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that basically Kay Kamen, when he's structuring those promotions for Christmas, is always looking for new ideas. And so that year, he he's basically telling the big department stores, I have a ride for you. Kids are going to be able to go on that magic carpet and just experience like the whole thing as if they were traveling to different places. And so I'm not sure exactly to which places they would travel because we don't have those details. But yes, he does that, and then he creates a book that goes with that, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Who created the screen content for these? So there's going to be like a projection element and some moving or jiggling seats or something like that. Does Disney create the screen content, or where does the screen content
I
come
don't
from?
know. We don't have those details. I wish we knew exactly what's on the screen. I wish we knew exactly who had done that. We don't. We don't know. We don't know. Otherwise, I would have included the information. It's a shame.
That's okay. It's amazing that you found that, because I have never heard of that before, and I was just delighted when I saw that in your book. So I have just one last question for you. So what is it about the Disney characters that lend themselves so well to the Christmas holidays? Other animated characters from the early part of the 20th century, such as Betty Boop or Popeye or Bugs Bunny or Woody Woodpecker, never really get attached to a holiday in the same way. If anything's in terms of popular characters and their relationship to Christmas, it's mostly the Disney characters, and then maybe a few decades later, and to a lesser extent, the Peanuts characters. But what is it about the Disney characters that so closely tied them to Christmas?
Well, to tie a character to Christmas, you need two elements. You need a character that is very, very popular with kids. And you need a character which is just very popular in itself. And so when you look at Betty Boop, very popular or quite popular in the late 1920s, I think, and early 1930s.
Early 30s, yeah.
Early 30s. Sorry, I can't remember when she started, but yes, early 30s. So very or quite popular, but clearly a character that's more aimed at adults than at kids. I mean, she's a bit risque. There are elements that are not that kid friendly. Um, Popeye, eh, I don't know, a bit the same thing, a little bit edgy and so on and so forth. Not that family friendly or kids friendly. And then obviously the Warner Bros. Characters first they arrive much later in terms of when they become very very popular. It's a different vibe. It's clearly not a Christmas vibe. It's a merchandise vibe clearly, but again they are more edgy. They are more their humor is a bit is very different. It doesn't create that warm feeling that you associate with Christmas, whereas obviously it does when it comes to the Disney characters.
Yeah. So thank you so much for talking with us today. I had a tremendous time going through your book this week. And for listeners, there's so many stories in it that we didn't touch on today. And we've just talked about a few things that are in the book, but so much of the book are these beautiful illustrations and photographs that really put you back into the 1930s so you can see what it was like to experience Disney all those years ago. So
I mean, you know one thing, Todd. What's
Sure.
really funny is basically when I do those books, when I start researching those books, and with the Hyperion Historical Alliance team putting those books together, the thrill for me more than anything else is the thrill of the kid who's opening his Christmas presents. It's just thrill of the discovery. It's the thrill of seeing things that I've never seen before. And as you know, I mean, I own every single book ever written about Disney and Disney history. And you've just been at our place a few weeks ago, and so you've seen it in person. What is really exciting for me is to discover things that I had never seen before. And in this case, I mean, during that whole project, I kept discovering more and more and more that I had not seen before. And that was crazy because I've been looking at Disney history and studying Disney history for 40 years, and there is still so much to discover. And so, obviously, the other part of the fun is to say, okay, once you have discovered all of that, is to share it with people that might find it as fun as I do. So, yeah.
I love the insights that this book offers to the 30s. Like one of the things that I was thinking about when I went through it and was specifically looking at the photos was this is set up in contrast to the harshness of the Depression that's happening at the same time. That these window displays, these Mickey Mouse lands inside of the department stores are a reprieve, a place where people and their kids can escape from some of the difficulties that they're having elsewhere. And I think that creates a really, really strong association in families between the characters that they like and this stretch of history, which was difficult to move through.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure you've got another book coming out sometime soon, so we're going to have you back in the near future.
Thank you so much, Todd. It was fun, as always.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
I'll be back next week with a new episode, but as it's Christmas week, which is the big holiday here, it will be a shorter episode as I hope we all take time this coming week to focus in on friends and family. Again, Didier Ghez's book is called Mickey Mouse in the 1930s, The Christmas Season. It will be available next month. Lastly, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast, and as you think about end-of-the-year giving, I hope you keep our podcast in mind. You can support our podcast by becoming a monthly subscriber over on Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available anywhere else. But the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Here's hoping the holidays this year are good to you. Until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.